to our first podcast of the 2021 school year for UNC-Chapel Hill Active Minds. My name is Brooke, and I'm so happy that you all are here to listen with us today. And we hope that this year, that from our podcast, you can learn things to apply to everyday life, and that's our goal for this year. So I'm the podcasting co-chair for this year, and I'm a UNC senior and psychology major. And I will go ahead and have the rest of the team introduce themselves.
All right, my name is Natalie. I am the other co-chair for the podcasting committee. I am a sophomore majoring in psychology with minors in statistics and cognitive science.
And I'm Evan. I'm one of the co-presidents of this chapter of Active Minds here at Chapel Hill, filling in as another member here, another host on the podcast today. I'm another senior psych major, and we have a very special guest, but I think I'm going to let Natalie actually bring that up. It's our first guest ever on the pod, so really, really hyped about it.
Yes, so this guest just so happens to be my mother. She is Dr. Jones, so different last name than me, but she has her doctorate in clinical psychology. She actually went to UNC for a little bit too, but our main focus with her today is on the topic of positive psychology, which she teaches at UNCW. Is there anything else you'd like to say about yourself, Mother?
Well, I also have a full-time private practice, so
Yes.
I'm engaging in therapy and assessment every day.
Do you think you could kind of define positive psychology, like what it actually is?
Well, I think positive psychology is about helping people recognize their individual strengths and their positive characteristics and using those to optimize their life and also help make contributions to society and to their community and to different organizations.
So it's like a different approach as like from what therapy kind of used to be?
Well, I think for a long time, and a lot of it really started with the funding that was coming from the National Institutes of Mental Health. And they tended to fund, they wanted to use their money to help people that needed quote unquote fixing. So they tended to fund research that was focused on psychopathology. And so a lot of emphasis, both in terms of research and in therapy, was on abnormality or psychopathology and, fixing what is wrong instead of also recognizing, what is right or what are people's strengths. And I think I was always interested in positive psychology, but it just didn't always have that name. I was an undergraduate in the 80s and 90s. And the first journal I ever subscribed to was the Journal of Humanistic Psychology. And you may recognize the name Abraham Maslow, the hierarchy of needs, but he founded that journal. And humanistic psychology really emphasized personal growth and human potential and, of course, self-actualization, because that's what Maslow was all about, and also the search for meaning and social change. But I think what it was lacking was the research component, and that's what Seligman really brought to positive psychology, because he was able to get the funding. He was able to get funding outside of sources like the National Institutes of Mental Health, and he was able to get some private funding from, philanthropists that were really interested in his work. So,
I guess prior to your experience with positive psychology, when you were just first learning about it and whatnot, well, from then to now, how has it impacted your view of mental health, and when you got into your profession, how has it impacted how you've helped with treatment and research?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I vividly remember, positive psychology, at least in modern terms, was really born in 1998, and that's when Martin Seligman was the president of APA. And he, really wanted to make it the theme of his presidency. And I remember his inaugural address, which was published in the American Psychologist. And I knew it was going to be, pivotal. And I loved the change from the focus being, primarily on psychopathology, to also, include those positive characteristics and helping people to recognize their individual strengths. But I think it was really when I started teaching positive psychology in 2009 that I really kind of started diving in and really utilizing the concepts in my own clinical work. And that's one of the reasons I choose to continue teaching, is because it keeps me active in current research and what's going on. And, I think also I have a lot to offer students, because I'm not just an academic. I'm out there doing this every day and with real people and dealing with things like insurance companies. And so, I think I have a lot to offer, but I also learn a lot by teaching. Again, Seligman took positive psychology beyond what humanistic psychology did, because of supporting that empirical research. And in terms of my own practice, one of the first things that happened, I knew about positive psychology and I really liked it, and, did personal readings about it. But I got trained in 2007 in EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And I did that because I started working with a lot of trauma, a lot of military trauma, because at that time I was living close to Fort Bragg, which is, the largest Army base. And, this was during the progression of the Iraq wars and all of that. And I just found that the talk therapy that I was trained, really did not help with trauma. And that just talking about people's trauma just brought up all the emotional charge along with it. And so I sought out that training, and it was really a wonderful tool. But what I started to notice is, as people worked through their trauma, it's like it allowed their brain to have more access to positive memories, and also to help lay down more positive memories. But I think just in general, in terms of therapy and assessment, I think it's all about not just helping people survive, it's about helping them to thrive. Of course, we want to address people's psychopathology. We want to help people feel less depressed and feel less anxious and to feel better. But we don't want to just stop there. We want to help them, recognize what strengths do they have, and how can they apply that in their everyday life. And also just in their relationships, how can they be more positive? How can they talk to themselves more positively? Sometimes just giving people permission to talk in a more positive way to themselves is really just astounding. And I always encourage people, you need to learn to talk to yourself the way your best friend would talk to you. So, and even in my psychological reports that I write when I do testing and assessment, even if I diagnose someone with something like ADHD or autism or depression, I'm going to talk about how to address that, but I'm also going to talk about, recognizing that person's strengths and using those strengths to help provide positive reinforcement. So it's looking at that and helping the person to be really aware of that as well.
Yeah, so I know you've mentioned Martin Seligman quite a few times. I remember when I first kind of figured out what positive psychology was, I asked you about it, and the first name you mentioned was Seligman and all of his books. And one book that I have read was the Learned Optimism book.
Mm-hmm.
And it had such a large impact on my life. It was amazing. I encourage anyone that's listening to this to read it. So I was wondering if you could elaborate on this concept of learned optimism, which is kind of like exactly what it sounds like. Like we sort of identify ourselves as either being optimistic or pessimistic. But if you're pessimistic, can you learn to be optimistic?
Sure, I think so. It's all about, recognizing your thoughts. And, Seligman really encouraged that early on. He started a lot of programs where they tried to implement these principles of learned optimism in schools. Because if we can teach children how to do it early on, then that's great. So in terms of being optimistic, first you have to challenge your assumptions about human nature. A lot of people have assumptions, a lot in part because of the media that we're faced with. Then you want to challenge yourself and those internal, critical voices that limit you. And also gratitude, focusing on what you have and not what you don't have. And noticing even the little things. I don't know if you remember when you and your brother were really young, for a while in the car on the way to school, I would ask you guys, tell me 2 things you're grateful for. And you couldn't do the same one every day. It had to be something different. So you really, had to start thinking of things outside the box. And it really makes you think, wow, we have hot water to take a shower with every day. And some people don't have that. So, gratitude and recognizing what you do have can be really strong. And, I think challenging those assumptions about human nature is very powerful in terms of being more optimistic. And, I want to encourage everyone to read a book that Natalie and I have read recently. And I actually started incorporating this book, some readings from it, as well as some assignments related to it in my positive psychology course this semester. But it's called Humankind, A Hopeful History. And it's a Dutch author named Walter Bregman, Bregman. But the basic premise is that, people don't suck as much as we think they do. And, deep down, people are really pretty decent. I think in these times when we're so divided and, sometimes if you find out someone has different beliefs than you, then suddenly you just want to block yourself from them. So, trying to look beyond that and try to look at someone's decency. Bregman says that if we can actually trust each other and if we do have the courage to move on to a more realistic, hopeful view of human nature, then we can move to a very different kind of society as well. And we can build very different kinds of schools and democracies and workplaces. And he says that, we often assume that during times of crises that, civilization will just crack and people will reveal their true selves, which is this animalistic, aggressive, horrible side. But the reality is that, that's really what brings people's humanity out. And in circumstances like that, people are really kind. And the thing I really like about this book is he uses evidence. He uses research and evidence, and he goes over a lot of evidence from sociology, more than 700 case studies that show that, especially in times of crisis, we actually show our best selves. And, there's just an explosion of altruism and cooperation. And, I know certainly here in Wilmington, when we had the Hurricane Florence several years ago, that was seen a lot, people being helpful and kind. And I think that happens again and again after natural disasters such as earthquakes, floods. If you zoom out a little bit during this pandemic, you may see the same phenomenon. So.
Another question that we have for you, Dr. Jones, is how can we become learned optimists?
Well, again, I think, really challenging those assumptions about human nature, and then again, challenging yourself and, those internal critical voices that limit you. And then, doing things that connect you with others, really build relationships and engage in altruistic acts, because that always helps you more than it actually helps the other person.
All right. And then another concept that you have taught me about is the state of flow, which is so interesting to me because basically what it is when you're doing schoolwork or doing something, whatever you want to do, it's the state where you're completely immersed in that activity. Like you could be doing homework and you tune out everything. So I kind of wanted you to teach us a little bit more about that state of flow, especially since we're all college students struggling to focus with all of the factors surrounding us, and how we can implement this into our daily lives.
I have a challenge question for you all, though. Can anyone pronounce the individual's name that really wrote a lot about the modern terms of flow?
I have it written down, and that's why I did not try to pronounce it. We're gonna try. Is it Csikszentmihalyi?
It's something like Csikszentmihalyi.
Csikszentmihalyi. You've told me before. I know.
Yeah, it took me a while to get that one, but yeah, flow is awesome. It's when you're in an intense involvement in an activity, and this happens for me when I'm working with clients and I'm helping them, and I'm really immersed in my work. It also happens when I engage in hobbies, riding horses, or now that I'm in Wilmington, fishing or being on or near the water. There's a place I love to go to called Masonboro Island, and you can only get there by boat. And then it's like you have this 8-mile stretch of beach all to yourself. And it's just amazing. So flow happens when you're engaged in an activity and your attention is so focused on what you're doing that it isn't split between two or more thoughts or actions. So you're absorbed in such a way that you don't even notice any unnecessary effort on your part. You may lose track of time because you're so involved in what you're doing. My husband and I went out this morning to Masonboro Island and did a little fishing, and I was telling him, I said, it's like it felt like 10 minutes, but we were out there for several hours. And so that's that state of flow. And there's several ways people can experience flow, and really flow is not an on or an off kind of thing. It's sort of a spectrum. There's mild states of it, and then there are really intense states of it. But reading a book you enjoy, playing sports or competitive games, being with really good friends or family members, creating art or music, or enjoying art or music, relaxing on the beach, or being with nature in other ways, maybe going into the forest. I know you really liked the concept of forest bathing. And that's what it's all about, is, encouraging that state of flow. And I think, what the challenge is now is, we have so many distractions with social media and electronics and TV. And so, we often have that sort of dual attention. And so I think sometimes to really get into that state of flow, you have to get away from a lot of that. And that's one thing I challenge my students to do in my positive psychology class is, put away the social media for a couple of days, stay away from electronics as much as you can, and really engage in some of these activities. and see if you can get into that state of flow.
Would you say that positive psychology is more focused on living in the moment and just kind of taking it day at a time and being grateful for things as they come? Or would you say that positive psychology has a lot to do about thinking about the future, goal setting, and then sort of working backwards to present day and going from there, keeping your mindset positively focused in that regard?
I think it's both. A lot of people put a lot of focus on mindfulness, which is really great and is a good thing to train your mind to be able to be truly present in the moment and, really experiencing what's going on at that moment. But Seligman, he really talks a lot about, what makes us different from other species is that we do have the capacity to think about the future. And that's not a bad thing. It doesn't have to be a bad thing. And if we can think about the future in hopeful ways and in positive ways, that's a good thing. It's like visualizing, what's going to happen. Of course, the challenge, when I work with people in therapy is a lot of people do what I call catastrophizing. They think of future events and they think of all the negative things that, all the bad things that can happen. If they have to give a presentation in class, they're thinking, oh, what if I mess up? Or, what if I forget? Or what if I look stupid? Or, what if I stumble over my words? But I challenge them instead. Well, let's think about it in terms of how you want it to go. What are the things? What are the positive things? What are the good things you can envision? I think the same can be said about, looking at the future in positive ways. How can we set things up to be more positive? Working with children at an early age on, those ways of thinking and those cognitions and being more optimistic.
What are some things that we can use from positive psychology to cope with the pandemic, especially being college students?
Yeah, that's a good question because I know it's been really challenging, especially for young people. And I know people your age missed a good part of your senior year in high school and then missed most of your first year in college. But again, I think challenging those assumptions about human nature and, challenge yourself to really examine, did anything positive come from the pandemic? Were you able to focus more on relationships? I know for me professionally, there have been some positive things. Insurance companies are supporting telehealth now, and that has opened up access to a lot of people. That's, a good thing. It's opened up telework. A lot of people are able to have more flexibility working from home and balancing with their family life. I think in some ways, the pandemic has, forced us to look at, what is really important. I think it's also allowed certain social issues to sort of rise to the top of our awareness, and I think that's a good thing because we have to be aware of them before we can do anything about them. And also, a focus on that altruism again. Doing something to help others is always going to help you more. That's another thing, a little exercise I give my students. And I think that's why positive psychology is always such a popular class, and not just at the university where I'm teaching. I think everywhere it's always a positive class, and it's because popular. And I think it's because students get so much personally out of the class. They learn a lot about themselves. One of the first exercises I do is I have them take the values in action inventory, and they have to talk about, what were their two top most positive characteristics. And they may not have even known, what those were before. And then I also give them little exercises like with altruism, surprise someone and do them a favor, mow the lawn for a neighbor or an elderly person, or volunteer to babysit for someone that's a single parent, or, speak up for someone that maybe doesn't have much of a voice, or, volunteer somewhere like a hospital, an animal shelter, or the literacy council. And, always the person gets so much out of that. And, another project I have my students do towards the end of the semester is I have them choose, and they can pick whatever they want, but they have to choose a topic from positive psychology. It might be gratitude, it might be altruism. But they have to find a way to apply it. They have to find a way to, apply it in their lives, maybe someone else's life. And then they have to sort of analyze what happened while incorporating, theory and research from the field. But I've had so many say that project, literally just changed their lives. So, maybe they pick gratitude, and maybe they have themselves and their family keep a gratitude journal for 2 weeks. Again, you can't put the same thing every day. You have to put 3, different things every day. Or maybe they choose altruism and they go volunteer for, a soup kitchen for the first time that they've ever done that. And so it's really neat to read those papers. It's always a lot of fun because they just get so much personally out of it.
In regards to state of flow that you had mentioned earlier, what are ways that we can utilize that in our everyday lives as students here at UNC or any university to better ourselves?
Are you asking what are ways you can get into that state of flow, or how does getting into that state of flow benefit?
I guess both.
Okay. Well, ways that you can do that, like I mentioned earlier, are, reading a book you enjoy, playing, if you like sports, playing sports, or, competitive games. I had friends in college that were big Dungeons and Dragons, players, and they would get into that state of flow when they were playing that game. Being with really good friends or with really good family members. And, that doesn't mean in a partying sense. I think flow is really a state of mind you get into when you're sober. Creating art or music, or enjoying art or music, being with nature or with animals. And I think, being able to get in that state of flow is important because it's good for our health. It does really good things for our hearts. It helps us connect with ourselves, and is a way to relax and reduce stress. So there's a lot of benefits to it. And, I think as students, the challenge is you can get so busy, busy going to class and doing your homework and, going to work, or, this, and this. So you get so busy, it's hard to take time to maybe do some of those things that create flow. And so that's the challenge as a student, is you have to really carve out the time. Some therapists call it self-care. You've got to do some self-care, and that's really important. So, writing that into your schedule. I'm going to go take a hike at, 9:00 on Friday morning. So, making it that important.
That's amazing, and thank you so much for sharing. I think that's really helpful to anyone in the pandemic or just in life in general now, because we're kind of out of that state of flow, because from day to day we don't really know what's coming next. Policies, mask wearing, mandates, or being quarantined in our rooms for 10 days. I mean, it's just really hard for everyone during these times. So we really appreciate all the advice that you've given us in general today. And we especially thank you for joining us. And it's been an honor talking with you and just having you here to represent Active Minds. Evan, Natalie, do you guys have anything to share?
Have anything else?
If your university offers positive psychology, I highly recommend it.
I think we do. Not every semester, but I think we have one professor that teaches.
Great.
So,
Very good.
yeah.
All right, and I would just say that I'll try to get that professor's info and other stuff in our transcripts that we're putting with the podcasts. For those who are listening, we're going to be trying to write up and list a bunch of resources and things that we didn't have time to include. So we would definitely be trying to include that as well. So be on the lookout for our transcript with that other information.
Please be on the lookout for next month's podcast that we will be uploading. And also, please check out our website and also our Heal Life page if you are a UNC student. And we thank you for listening.